And good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute. Hey, I just want to express my appreciation to all of those who have responded to my offer on this great book, Exegetical Essays on the Resurrection. Making a very special offer. I'm doing this series right now on the resurrection, and this is really a great book. I was reading here a comment that says, since Christ's physical death was a substitution for believers, so also was his physical resurrection perfect enough for all believers to qualify them as totally raised from the dead. One need not physically die in the likeness of Christ's death in order to die with Christ. And likewise, one need not be physically raised from the casket in order to be entirely raised with Christ. For Paul, Jesus is the resurrection of the dead, and those in him participated in the eschatological resurrection of God's people. That's just great stuff. There's so much more in there. Don't forget, I'm making this very, very special offer. The book is normally $17.95 plus $4.95 shipping. However, if you go to my website, www.eschatology.org or BibleProphecy.com, you order the book. Now, it will charge you $17.95 plus $4.95. However, mention that you saw the offer on YouTube, and the book will cost you $15. I will refund the balance, okay? $15 total. So, order your book today. I'm sharing with you some thoughts on the resurrection from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I took note in an earlier segment that Paul said that his resurrection doctrine was nothing but the hope of Israel. Acts 26:21 and following, Acts 24:14 and following. Now this is critical, folks. Why? Well, it's critical because both the amillennial and the postmillennial world say, well, God was through with Israel in the first century. Well, if God was through with Israel in the first century, then what happened to her promises? We cannot say, it's simply illogical to say, that God was through with Israel, God was through with the Old Covenant in the first century, but we're still looking for the fulfillment of God's promises made in the Old Testament, made to Old Covenant Israel, at the end of the Christian age, at the end of the New Covenant age. There's no logic, there's no reason, there's no biblical support for that idea. So, Paul said his doctrine of the resurrection was nothing but the hope of Israel. As we have already seen, one of the prophecies that Paul draws from is Isaiah chapter 25. Well, the other one is Hosea chapter 13, verse 14. O grave, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Now, here's what's critical about Hosea. The story of Hosea is the story of divorce, departure, and death. Okay? Because of Israel's sin, God divorced her. When he divorced her, he departed from her. Hosea 5, verse 15 and following. I will depart and go back to my place, said the Lord. Number 3, when God divorced Israel, when he departed from Israel, he killed her. I have slain her with the words of the prophets. Hosea chapter 13, the death that is in focus. When Israel sinned, he died. Now it's pretty obvious it's not physical death because he goes ahead to say, and yet he sinned more and more. So, here are dead men sinning. So the story of Hosea, from which Paul is drawing his resurrection doctrine, is the story of divorce, departure, and death. But the story of redemption in Hosea is the story of remarriage, return, and resurrection. That's right. God said in the last days he would betroth Israel to himself again. He would return to her. Hosea chapter 6. He will come to us. He will raise us up that we might live in his presence. There's resurrection. Now, here's what's so critical about this. This means that resurrection, the resurrection of Hosea, which is the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15, would be at the time of the remarriage, which is the time of the return. Matthew chapter 25 is the return of Christ, the bridegroom, for the wedding, okay? But watch this. Matthew chapter 22. A king made a great wedding feast for his son. He sent out his servants to call those who had been invited, already been invited. That's the force of the Greek of the text. Whose wedding promise was it? Israel's wedding promise. God said he'd remarry Israel in the last days. Isaiah 62, Hosea chapter 6. Okay. Those who had been invited, who were now being called to the wedding, spurned the invitation. They persecuted the servants sent to them, killed them. The king was angry, sent out his army, and destroyed those wicked servants and burned their city. Sent out his servants and said, call everybody in so that the wedding feast may be full. You know, as Donald Hagner says in the Word Biblical Commentary, it is impossible to read Matthew 22 verse 7 without seeing AD 70 there. Now folks, there's no postponement of the wedding. There's no delay. There's no gap. The important question is, where is the wedding posited? At the destruction of the city whose inhabitants killed God's servants. Do we have any doubt about that? Now remember, the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 is the resurrection of Hosea. But the resurrection of Hosea would come at the time of the wedding. And Jesus himself put the time of the wedding at the destruction of Jerusalem. You see how great that is? You see how perfect that is? Do you really honestly catch the power of that? Hey, thanks for joining me for this morning's program. We appreciate you being with me. We'll see you on the flip side.